We're sitting here today in the Innovation Center on the beautiful campus of Indiana University here in Bloomington, Indiana. And with me is Susan Sons. She's a Senior Systems Analyst at the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research here at Indiana University. She's also the president of the Internet Civil Engineering Institute. How are you doing, Susan?
Good, thank you.
So tell me about yourself. What do you do here at the CACR?
I could go into a lot of complicated descriptions, but I think the best characterization is I'm the hacker for the good guys. I work on tech, I work on people. When a science community says we have this amazing new instrument that, by the way, cost $500 million and is connected to the internet, how do we protect it? There's no best practices guide for that. There's only one of them. They come to me and they say, and my team, and they say, what do we do about this? And we work from first principles and we figure out what defensive measures are needed and how we make sure that we're enabling scientists to do their job, because a lot of people are afraid of security because they think it's about saying no, no, no. No, what tools do we put in place to make doing your job safely? Because I can make anything safe by destroying it, putting it in concrete and throwing it to the bottom of the ocean, but it stops being useful at that point.
Right.
So I do a lot of things like that, and with the Internet Civil Engineering Institute, we are all about securing and maintaining the common software infrastructure that makes the internet work. When you pay your internet bill, you pay the people who run the lines to your house, and you pay for all the hardware and the electricity and the personnel at your internet service provider. But the software that makes the internet work is mostly written and maintained by volunteers. And those volunteers, we've had personnel turnover because people have to have day jobs. They have to have other things going on in their lives. And we've also seen them aging. And a lot of them didn't really think about succession planning and didn't have people in place. So we've seen a lot of projects not get the attention they need because as new developers come in, it's really approachable to work on an email client or a game. It's less approachable to work on the core of the internet. So we haven't brought up enough people, and a lot of the software ends up in security nightmares. So we try to help and we try to support that software so that the internet stays free and open, because we don't want one big entity to try to take it over. Then it's not everybody's internet anymore.
So, do our users of Facebook have an interest in this sort of secure internet environment too?
Absolutely. If you want the internet in America to be able to talk to the internet in France, to be able to talk to the internet in Asia, you care about this because it remains free, open, and interoperable, because nobody controls the core protocols, because a whole bunch of different people with competing interests control all the moving parts. And that freedom and competition and that open ecosystem is what keeps anybody from making a completely walled garden. And we have countries that are trying hard to balkanize the internet right now, and what's largely preventing them is that they're dependent on technologies from other countries that are not their own. So we have that, and we have the fact that when threats that pervade the whole internet happen, that means that it's your credit card information, your medical information, your banking information, the bank's banking information, the power grid. Anything that touches the internet becomes vulnerable, and the internet itself is vulnerable. So we really care about the little things that nobody really sees, because it's 12 layers under the part you see.
I see. Before we go any further, if people are interested in finding out more about the CACR, the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, how can they do that?
CACR is at cacr.iu.edu.
Very good, thank you. And if you're interested in looking into more of Science Node information, sciencenode.org. Well, one thing we're here to talk about today is a recent change, or maybe not a change as we found out earlier, to internet privacy regulations. There was some regulations in place that prohibited the FCC from allowing internet service providers to sell private browsing history. But this last Monday, President Trump signed into law a new bill that waived last year's Obama-era FCC regulations, which allows just that to happen. So now private browsing history is up for sale.
Absolutely.
Am I characterizing that correctly?
Mostly. You missed a couple details, and I'd like to fill that in. First of all, we didn't lose privacy we already had, and that's important. The last Congress passed this law that would have given us a privacy we previously didn't have, and it's now been repealed before it ever went into effect. So they were already selling your browser history. And the ISPs went to Congress and they said, you still let Apple sell everyone's internet history. You still let Google sell everyone's internet history. You still let Facebook sell everyone's internet history. This is unfair and anti-competitive because you've singled us out and taken us out of a market while we're running infrastructure to everyone's houses and businesses. And this is anti-competitive and you can't do it to us. And Congress listened to them and they repealed that. I have to say, I'd have been happier if they'd gone in the other direction and just made everyone respect user privacy. But I don't feel like we've gone as users, as just a huge population across the country, you know. There was a huge split on this bill, Democrat, Republican, but if you survey people, not people in Congress, but, you know, citizens across the country, the vast majority, without regard to political alignments, I don't care what party you are, if you're independent, if you're Republican, Democrat, a different party, whatever, don't like the selling of this information wholesale. But they haven't done a lot to disincentivize it because we're still using services that we know are wholesale selling our information and giving them more of our information. When you log into Facebook, you're doing it. When you log into Google, you're doing it. When you log into Twitter, you're doing it. And so we've given our implicit consent and we've given them a lot of power to continue getting that, whether we like it or not.
Well, let's define a little bit of our terms here. So these internet service providers can sell our personal browsing history. So first off, what is an internet service provider? So
an internet service provider in this context is anyone who's giving you the connection between you and the wider internet. So it isn't someone who runs a specific service such as Google or Facebook, unless you're a Google Fiber subscriber. It is Verizon and AT&T and Comcast and whoever your cell phone provider is if you use cellular data, and Time Warner Cable and people like that.
Okay. And so then what is this data we're talking about? What sort of personal browsing history is being sold here?
So it really depends a lot on your internet habits, how much you're giving them. For a typical user, this means that they have a list of every site you've tried to go to, every search you've ever done, and also how much time you're spending on different sites and any content they're sending you that is not behind HTTPS. So if you see that lock in your browser that says it's a secure site, that's HTTPS, that's encrypted, and your browser, your internet service provider can see the domain name you went to. And the amount of traffic, like they can tell that you're getting more traffic from Netflix than you are from Indiana University, but they can't see what any of the content of that traffic is. That's why HTTPS is so important, because it reduces the data that you're leaking. There are measures you can take to even further reduce the data that you're sharing, but I'm not seeing typical internet users actually taking those measures. So they're just kind of spraying that data to 30 or 40 companies constantly in the course of their internet browsing.
So why would anybody want to purchase this? What use is this?
It's used in targeting political ads and figuring out what motivates people and how to change their minds. It's used for the exact same purposes in marketing. It's used heavily in getting data for different types of experimentation, both with marketing, for different social activists. I love the people who are such hypocrites and they cry out against this thing and then they buy market data so that they can do their activism better. Wait a minute, what did you say last week? And we see a lot of people, a lot of companies buying it to try to honestly understand the people that they serve better, and a lot of organizations for the same reason. It's not always malicious. A lot of it is we want information to accomplish our mission better. The problem is by the time they've bought it, now your information is sitting with thousands of entities that you don't know who they are and you don't have a chance to consent or withdraw that consent. And that can be really harmful.
So yeah, that can be harmful. Can you explain what might be good about this, how we might actually like this?
Some people really look at the upsides in that if you ever look at the difference between how intrusive does an advertisement feel when it's something that you find offensive or uninteresting versus when it's an advertisement for a cool new thing that gets you excited. Deciding what's going to excite whom is based on that kind of data. those kinds of customized experiences when we go out into the world. Another thing is that a lot of this data can be useful in proving things about social trends. I see researchers interested in this a lot because they really want to know how many people believe X versus Y, and does that really come out in their behavior? Because when people self-report, a lot of times they're trying to meet what they expect other people's expectations to be. So measuring people's behavior tells you more about social trends than asking in a survey. It also gives you a broader base of people because everyone's out there in the world using the internet just about, whereas very few people are going to take the time to answer your survey. So that can be really interesting. Another thing is that we have a lot of small companies who are breaking through based on the fact that they're no longer disadvantaged by big companies that have data on markets that they don't have access to. Because they can go in and go to one of these big data brokers and say, you know, I want to know how much someone can afford to pay for this service. And I don't want to know how much this guy and this guy is charging and make a guess. I want to know what people can really afford to pay because I need to be able to be competitive against behemoths who have huge research and marketing departments that I can't afford to build because I'm a small company starting up in a disadvantaged community. So there are upsides.
What are the downsides here? Let's talk about those a little bit more.
Yeah. So the downsides are, first of all, there is a massive chilling effect going on because a lot of people, whenever that first event happens in your life, when you realize exactly how much about you has become public, people shut down. I've seen people who were thinking that they were going to get this great new job, and then their prospective employer saw something that they said on social media, and it put them off, and now they're not getting this great new job. I see people who are silencing themselves on issues that they really care about because they live and work in a community that's hostile to those issues. I see people who simply censor themselves because they're part of many very different communities. I found myself doing this. I'm part of a lot of communities that don't necessarily get along well with one another. And I find that just because I'm a person who does a lot of social crossover, I have to be quieter because my social media presence is visible to a lot of people who wouldn't get along with one another and don't share the same opinions and need to see different pieces of me. And I don't have control over that. An even bigger fear is I do things like working with journalists, victims of domestic violence, and other people who need to not be tracked. And these people are in danger because it is so easy to get a hold of their information that it's not even funny. They pretty much, they have to give up a lot of the benefits of the internet and a lot of benefits of modern technology in order to protect their safety. So I see that a lot, and I see a lot of government surveillance and a lot of government profiling going on. And I don't want to live in a world where we start profiling people who haven't done anything wrong yet and say, well, we think maybe this person might do something wrong, so we're going to preemptively limit them or punish them or take away their freedom. Because someday someone we hate will be elected to a powerful position and they'll be making those decisions. A lot of people decide what is okay based on the idea that someone they respect is in charge. But I guarantee you, if you wait long enough, sometime in your lifetime, someone who terrifies you will be in charge. And I don't care what your political alignment is. You might disagree on who the terrifying one was. But someone who terrifies you will be in charge at some point.
It's interesting you bring up politics because recently, actually the last election, there was indications that data was harvested and used in a lot of Facebook dark ads that were targeted just for specific users based upon personal data that was harvested. Is this another problem or a potential problem?
It's certainly a problem, but it never came up in this bill because they were only targeting ISPs. They didn't care how much Facebook and Google sold your data. They never addressed that. And that's something that really concerns me is that we have incredibly centralized our communication mechanisms. Facebook, Twitter, and Google account for, I cannot figure out how to measure what percentage of the information intake that the common American gets.
Very large.
And I'll tell you that it's big enough to be scary. 3 companies. And those 3 companies have huge cultural and economic overlap. And it's their server. If you run your computer system, I don't get to tell you what algorithm you get to use and how to run it. But if everybody's on the same thing using the same algorithms, it's amazing what you don't notice and how that information exchange is shaped. I'm part of a huge information security group that is very loosely knit. But in the last week, we've had a mass exodus of people leaving Twitter for another system called Mastodon.
Mastodon.
Which is really cool because there are multiple Mastodon servers run by different people with different ideals that all talk to one another. So if you don't like how information's shaped on your server, you jump to a different server, but you can still talk to your friends even if they don't leave. And all of a sudden, nobody controls the information flow completely, because if my friends and I are scattered across 30 different servers and one of us is seeing something nobody else is, we start to talk about it. And that decentralization is incredibly powerful because it gets rid of that central power base. And it helps some with privacy and surveillance, though the benefits there are limited. Okay. What it really helps with is a resilience against centralized manipulation of information. Okay. So I hope it grows. It's a service built on a much older network called OStatus, or the Fediverse, if you like trendy terms, that is really cool and already has a good community on it. So.
Excellent, excellent. Before we talk about possible solutions, let's talk about this question of there really is no privacy on the internet anyway. Do you buy that? Is that true? Should we really worry?
I don't think there's such a thing as complete privacy if you want to actually do something and interact with people. But that's true in the social world too. Every time I interact with you, you learn something about me. There was a time not long ago that a bunch of us ended up taking this online test related to your personality and how you interact with people for a work event. And a couple of people were really worried about taking it. And I'm the type who, instead of asking about the policy, I go examine the test, especially since I have a bit of a psych background. And I looked at the test and I'm like, if you can't figure out any of these things after knowing me for about 2 weeks, you are not paying attention. I'm okay with this.
You're okay with it?
Because of the exact content was, I'm radiating these things about my personality all the time. One of them was that I'm outgoing. Are you shocked?
I'm shocked. I'm very shocked.
Another was that I like to share information. Again, I'm sure you're shocked. So we always share some information about ourselves. And then everything becomes a cost-privacy ratio. There are things I can do when I need to be really, really anonymous, especially working in information security. There are times I need no one to know where something came from. Okay. Those things require a lot of knowledge. They require technological preparation, and they're not free. Then there's stuff in the middle that is pretty easy to do, limits some of your information leakage, requires a little mindfulness, but is mostly free or very cheap. And then there's just not paying any attention at all and leaking your information everywhere. Everything is a matter of degrees. What I would like is for people to realize that it's a spectrum and they can pick a sane place, and they don't either have to be complete super hacker who hides everything, and they don't have to be, completely not paying attention and leaking everything. I don't even do the super hacker thing 99.99% of the time. That's for special occasions.
So do you cover up the camera on your laptop or your computer?
CACR gives away these wonderful little doors. So you have a plastic door on top of your camera that you open when you're using it and close it when you're not using it. Wow. It's delightful. We love them.
Do you sell them to the public?
We will give them away if someone asks for them.
And once again, that's cacr.iu.edu. Very good. All right, let's talk about then what people can do. If they don't like the fact that their internet service provider is selling their personal browsing history, what can they do about this?
Okay.
Can you just get off the internet?
Sure.
Is that possible?
It's possible. It's probably not desirable for most people.
Okay.
I will tell you that I consider myself very successful in a highly technical software engineering field in cybersecurity. I get to be a researcher in a university-based research center, and I do not have a degree. I grew up on a hog farm and surrounded by bad neighborhoods. That is possible because when I was 12 years old, I stumbled onto the internet and was brought up by the people who built it. The internet is an amazingly powerful thing, and most of us don't want to give it up. Okay. You can keep in touch with friends around the world. You can learn things you never would have learned, and you can be exposed to cultures you never would have been exposed to. I believe it is a force for good, economically, socially, and in so many other ways. But you also don't want to give everything up to get that good. So at the easy tier, Whenever there's an HTTPS or secure version of a site, use it, because then you're exposing less of your browser history to your ISP. Do not log your browser into Google or Apple, because your browser syncs a ton of information to them and they're under no restriction, and right now no scrutiny. You can simply not log your browser in and keep that information locally. That doesn't mean never log into Google. I'm talking specifically about browser sync.
Okay.
You can, so just using HTTPS whenever possible. Most people use a lot of social media networks, a service or two to watch videos, and do some internet searching, and have very little traffic under that. That's probably a good 50% of internet users. All anybody's going to see is a bunch of domain names that they're really familiar with, and your internet traffic is not very interesting if you're always using HTTPS. If you want to get a little more protection than that, first of all, get away from free email servers. You are the product. They are scanning your email so that they can use it for marketing information.
You're talking about Gmail?
I'm talking about Gmail, I'm talking about Yahoo, I'm talking about anybody who is not charging you money to host your email.
Okay.
On the cheapest end, you have something like GoDaddy or Namecheap, which are very affordable. They're not one of the free providers, and while they're not my favorite, they work. In the middle end, you have something called Fastmail, which is $5 per user per month and freaking amazing, and it replaces your Google Calendar, your email, and everything, and it's not even hosted in the US. And on the high end, you've got something like ProtonMail, which is hosted in Switzerland, has a lot of encryption features that are not popular and not on most email providers yet, and is somewhere around 15 or 20 bucks a month, I think. I'd have to look it up, but still within the reach of a lot of people.
All right. So those are a couple of things people can do. They don't want to share or have their internet service provider selling their browsing history. Anything else we can do?
If you want to get to the higher end, you start using anonymous proxy services like Tor or secure VPNs. There's a lot of free VPNs out there that are junk because anybody can say, here's a VPN app. One of the security researchers I really like recently did a study, and over 80% of free VPNs available for Android do not even attempt to encrypt anything at all. Because it's really easy to write VPN apt on something and stick it in the store. And that's not, and the remaining 20%, some encrypt well, some don't. But this is among the free stuff. It gets better when you get into a pay-for app because, again, we're talking about incentives. That takes work. If someone's being paid for the work, they have a better reason to do it well. You know, so things like that. The more you want to learn about it, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, or EFF.org, has wonderful guides that are all free. Go get good advice, do good things, protect yourself.
Good deal. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Susan, thanks for talking to us. We will link to the sites that she has mentioned, EFF.org, the CACR.iu.edu. And if you have any questions for Susan, go ahead and fill them in there on our Facebook page, and Susan says she'll be happy to answer some questions you may have. So we're going to wrap it up here then. We're going to have a few more Science Node lives here in the future. We'll be at the Science March in Washington, D.C. here in a couple weeks, and also at the Internet 2 conference immediately following that. You'll be able to see us again at the Barcelona Prace Days in Barcelona, Spain. I guess that's where that's at. Cool. The International Supercomputing Conference in Frankfurt, and other events throughout the year. Once again, if you want to find out more about the Science Node, you can visit sciencenode.org. Susan, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
You guys have a good day.